Dr. Kate Miller pulled her thick coat tighter around her body as the cold Arctic wind cut through the research camp. She had been working in Alaska for 3 months now, studying how the ice was changing because of global warming. Her team was small but dedicated. Ben Clark handled all the rock and soil samples, while Lisa Wong looked for any signs of ancient human activity in the area. Kate stared at the computer screen showing the results from their ground radar equipment. Something was wrong with the readings. Deep beneath the frozen ground, about 200 feet down, the radar showed a large metallic object. At first, she thought it might be a natural metal deposit, maybe iron ore or copper that had formed millions of years ago. But the shape was too regular, too smooth to be natural. She called Ben over to look at the screen. He scratched his beard and frowned at the data. The object appeared to be nearly 800 feet long and roughly oval-shaped. Ben had never seen mineral deposits form in such a perfect pattern. Lisa joined them and suggested it might be an old ship that had been buried by ice over many years. But that seemed impossible. The ice in this area had been frozen solid for thousands of years. Kate decided they needed to take core samples from directly above the object. They used their drilling equipment to pull up long tubes of ice and frozen soil. When they reached the depth where the radar showed the metal object, the drill bit hit something hard. The sound was different from hitting rock. It was sharper, cleaner, like drilling through refined metal. When they pulled up the drill bit, small metal fragments were stuck to it. The pieces were unlike anything Kate had ever seen. The metal was incredibly light, but felt stronger than steel. When Ben tried to scratch one of the pieces with a knife, the tiny scratch mark seemed to heal itself within minutes. Lisa heated another fragment with a torch, but it did not change color or show any signs of damage even at extremely high temperatures. Kate knew they had found something important. She immediately called her supervisor at the National Science Foundation to report their discovery. Within 6 hours, her phone was ringing with calls from government officials and military personnel. 2 days later, a helicopter landed at their camp carrying Colonel Jack Hayes and a team of soldiers. Colonel Hayes was a serious man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. He explained that their discovery was now classified as a matter of national security. A full excavation team would arrive within the week, and their small research camp would become a major operation. Kate felt excited, but also worried. She had been hoping to study climate change, not to discover mysterious metal objects buried in the ice. The excavation began immediately. Heavy machinery was flown in by military helicopters. The soldiers and civilian contractors worked around the clock to carefully remove the ice and frozen soil above the object. Kate and her team were allowed to observe and help, but they were no longer in charge of the operation. As more of the object was revealed, it became clear that they had not found a natural formation or an old human artifact. The shape was clearly that of a spacecraft, but unlike anything built on Earth. The hull was smooth and curved in impossible ways, as if it had been grown rather than constructed. There were no visible seams or joints anywhere on the surface. The metal itself seemed to shift color slightly depending on the angle of the light hitting it. The most amazing discovery came when they used scanning equipment to look inside the buried craft. Despite being frozen in ice for what appeared to be tens of thousands of years, some of the ship's internal systems were still showing signs of electrical activity. Faint energy readings suggested that whatever power source the ship used was still partially functional. Kate watched as teams of scientists and engineers studied every inch of the exposed hull. The writing on the outside of the ship was completely unlike any human language. The symbols seemed to move and change when viewed from different angles, almost like they were alive. Lisa spent hours photographing and sketching the strange markings, trying to find any pattern or meaning in them. Ben focused on the metal samples they had collected. Every test he ran revealed new impossible properties. The metal could conduct electricity better than copper, resist heat better than titanium, and bend without breaking better than the finest steel. Yet it was lighter than aluminum and seemed to repair itself when damaged. He had never seen anything like it in all his years as a geologist. The excavation revealed that the ship was massive, much larger than they had first estimated. It was nearly intact, buried nose first in what must have been softer ground 50,000 years ago before the Ice Age froze everything solid. The back end of the ship was deeper underground, but scanning equipment showed it was complete and undamaged. Colonel Hayes established a permanent base camp above the excavation site. More scientists arrived daily, including experts in physics, biology, and computer systems. Security was tight, with soldiers patrolling the area constantly. Kate realized that their simple climate research project had accidentally uncovered what might be the most important discovery in human history. As winter approached and the days grew shorter, powerful lights were set up around the dig site. The work continued 24 hours a day. Kate often stood at the edge of the excavation, looking down at the alien ship emerging from its icy tomb. She wondered who had built it, where it had come from, and why it had crashed on Earth so long ago. Most importantly, she wondered if anyone or anything might still be alive inside the ancient vessel waiting beneath the Arctic ice. 3 weeks after the excavation began, the research team had grown to over 50 people. Dr. Sam Rodriguez arrived from the Centers for Disease Control, bringing equipment to study any biological materials they might find inside the ship. Dr. Amy Foster came from MIT with advanced physics instruments to analyze the ship's unknown technology. The newest addition was Dr. Paul Kim, a linguist from Harvard who specialized in ancient writing systems. The ship's hull was now completely exposed. Above ground, teams of workers had built a protective structure around the entire excavation to shield it from weather and prying eyes. Inside this temporary building, the alien vessel looked even more impressive. Its surface was perfectly smooth except for the strange writing that covered every inch of the hull. Paul spent his days photographing and cataloging the symbols, slowly building a database of what appeared to be thousands of different markings. Amy ran her instruments over every surface she could reach. The ship's metal hull seemed to be made from materials that did not exist on Earth. Her spectrometer could not identify the elements that made up the strange alloy. Even more puzzling, her electromagnetic sensors showed that the ship was still generating small amounts of energy from some unknown power source deep inside. The breakthrough came when Rick Stone, a maintenance engineer from the Air Force, noticed what looked like a doorway on the side of the ship. The outline was barely visible, just a slight depression in the otherwise smooth hull. When he ran his hand along the edge, the metal felt slightly warmer than the surrounding surface. Amy immediately brought her scanning equipment to examine the area more closely. Her instruments confirmed that this section of the hull was different from the rest. There were complex electronic systems just beneath the surface, and they were definitely active. Paul found that the symbols around this area were also different from those elsewhere on the ship. Instead of the flowing organic shapes found on most of the hull, these markings were more geometric and structured, almost like mathematical equations. Colonel Hayes was hesitant to attempt opening what might be an entrance to the ship. His orders were to secure the site and wait for more specialized teams to arrive from Washington. But after 2 days of debate, scientific curiosity won over military caution. Amy had detected breathable atmosphere inside the ship, and her readings showed no signs of dangerous radiation or toxic gases. Rick suggested they simply try touching the door mechanism to see what would happen. Amy and Sam stood nearby with emergency equipment while Paul filmed everything. When Rick placed his palm flat against the center of the depression, the ship responded immediately. The door slid open silently, revealing a corridor that extended into darkness beyond their flashlight beams. The interior of the ship was designed for beings roughly the same size as humans, but with some important differences. The corridors were slightly taller than necessary for people, and the walls curved inward at the top. Handholds were placed along the walls at regular intervals, but they were positioned for creatures with longer arms than humans possessed. Everything was built from the same smooth, self-healing metal as the exterior. As soon as the team stepped inside, emergency lighting began to activate throughout the ship. Soft blue lights came on automatically, creating enough illumination to see clearly. The air inside was cool and dry, but perfectly breathable. Amy's instruments showed that the atmosphere was actually cleaner than the air outside in the Arctic. They moved carefully through the ship's corridors, documenting everything, with cameras and taking measurements. The layout was logical and well-organized, with wider passages that seemed to be main corridors connecting to smaller side passages that led to individual rooms. Many of the rooms contained equipment they could not identify, but which was clearly built with great care and precision. Sam found what appeared to be a laboratory filled with sealed containers and complex apparatus. Many of the containers held liquids or gases that glowed with their own light. Some equipment was still running, making soft humming sounds that suggested it had been operating continuously for thousands of years. He was careful not to touch anything until they better understood what they were dealing with. Paul discovered that the writing inside the ship was even more varied than what they had found on the exterior. Different areas had different types of symbols, suggesting that the ship might have been built by a civilization with multiple languages or specialized technical vocabularies. Some of the markings seemed to be instructions or warnings, while others appeared to be decorative or artistic. The most significant discovery came when they reached what was clearly the ship's central control room. The chamber was circular and filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with soft light. When Amy approached the center of the room, holographic displays suddenly appeared in the air around her. Three-dimensional images showed star maps, mathematical formulas, and what appeared to be biological data about various life forms. The holographic displays responded to movement and touch. When Amy reached toward one of the floating images, it enlarged and became more detailed. Paul realized that this was some kind of interactive computer system, far more advanced than anything humans had ever built. The ship was not just preserved. It was still fully functional after 50,000 years buried in the ice. As they explored deeper into the ship, it became clear that whoever built it had been preparing for a long journey. They found storage areas filled with supplies, sleeping, quarters designed for extended voyages, and what appeared to be recreational spaces where the crew could relax during their travels. Everything suggested that this had been a ship built for exploration, not warfare. Kate stood in the central control room, watching the holographic displays shift and change in response to Amy's movements. She realized that they were not just looking at an ancient artifact. They had found a working spacecraft built by an intelligence far beyond anything humans had achieved. The ship was waiting patiently in the ice, ready to share its secrets with whoever was curious enough to explore its mysteries. Dr. Dan Cooper arrived at the Arctic research site with a team of computer specialists from the National Security Agency. His job was to figure out how to safely interface with the alien computer systems without damaging them or triggering any unknown security measures. Working alongside Amy, he began the delicate process of connecting human technology to the ship's holographic displays. The ship's computer system was unlike anything Dan had ever encountered. Instead of using electricity flowing through circuits, it seemed to operate using light patterns moving through the crystalline structures. The crystals could store incredible amounts of information in three-dimensional patterns that shifted and changed constantly. After several days of careful testing, Dan managed to establish a basic connection that allowed human computers to communicate with the alien system. What they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about Earth's history. The ship contained an enormous archive of information, a digital library that held the collected knowledge of an advanced civilization. The beings who built the ship called themselves the Keepers, and they had spent thousands of years traveling between different worlds, studying and documenting the development of intelligent life throughout the galaxy. Paul worked day and night to translate the Keeper language. The ship's computer was helpful, providing what seemed to be a built-in translation system that could convert Keeper symbols into human languages. As Paul became more skilled at reading their writing, he began to uncover the incredible story of why the ship had come to Earth. The Keepers had been explorers and scientists, driven by curiosity about the universe and the many different forms of life it contained. They visited hundreds of worlds, carefully studying each civilization they encountered without interfering in their natural development. Earth had been one of their final stops before something went terribly wrong with their mission. According to the ship's records, the Keepers had been observing human development for several centuries before their crash landing. They had been fascinated by early humans, finding them unlike any other species they had encountered in their travels. While most intelligent species developed either individual competition or group cooperation, humans seemed to combine both traits in unique and powerful ways. The archive contained detailed observations of human behavior that amazed the research team. The Keepers had watched human tribes sharing food during harsh winters, even when resources were scarce. They had observed humans creating art on cave walls, not for any practical purpose, but simply because they found beauty important. They had documented the development of complex social structures that balanced individual freedom with group responsibility. Most importantly, the Keepers had noted humanity's unusual combination of traits that other species rarely possessed together. Humans could be fiercely competitive when necessary, but also incredibly cooperative when facing common challenges. They could think logically and solve complex problems, but also create art, music, and stories that had no practical value except to bring joy and meaning to life. The ship's archive contained far more than just observations of human behavior. The Keepers had preserved the scientific knowledge of dozens of advanced civilizations. There were detailed instructions for building fusion power generators that could provide clean energy for thousands of years. They had blueprints for spacecraft that could travel faster than light, crossing the galaxy in months instead of millennia. Medical knowledge that could eliminate most diseases and extend human lifespans was stored in the crystal matrices. Sam spent weeks studying the biological samples that the Keepers had collected from hundreds of worlds. Many of the preserved organisms could revolutionize agriculture on Earth, producing more food with less water and growing in climates where normal crops could not survive. Others contained compounds that could cure cancer, heal spinal cord injuries, and reverse the effects of aging. But accessing this knowledge was not simple. The ship's computer system required more than just technical skill to unlock its secrets. Each section of the archive was protected by puzzles and tests that seemed designed to evaluate not just intelligence, but character. The computer would present moral dilemmas and ethical questions that had to be answered correctly before revealing the information stored beyond. Amy discovered that some of the ship's most advanced technologies were locked behind tests that specifically required human traits like empathy and creative thinking. To access the faster-than-light travel systems, the computer required proof that the users understood the responsibility that came with such power. To unlock medical technologies, it demanded evidence that the knowledge would be used to help others, not just to gain advantage over enemies. The ship's artificial intelligence began communicating directly with the team through holographic displays. It appeared as a shifting pattern of lights that could form into recognizable shapes when needed. The AI explained that it had been waiting for thousands of years for beings capable of understanding both the power and the responsibility contained. In the Keeper archives, the AI revealed that the Keepers had not crashed on Earth by accident. They had been fleeing from a galactic war between species that had gained advanced technology without developing the wisdom to use it responsibly. Civilizations that had learned to travel between stars and build weapons of incredible power had turn those tools against each other, threatening to destroy all intelligent life in the galaxy. The Keepers had chosen Earth as their final refuge because their observations of humanity suggested that humans might be different from the warlike species that had brought destruction to so much of the galaxy. Humans had shown the ability to compete when necessary, but cooperate when beneficial. They could be warriors when threatened, but also teachers, artists, and healers when given the chance. Kate stood in the central control room, surrounded by holographic displays showing star maps of distant galaxies and scientific formulas that could transform human civilization. She understood that they were not just looking at advanced technology. They were being offered a test that would determine humanity's future among the stars. The Keepers had left their knowledge as a gift, but only for a species mature enough to use it wisely. The ship's AI made it clear that accessing the full archive would require humanity to prove they were ready for such responsibility. The tests would continue, each one more challenging than the last, designed to reveal whether humans had truly developed beyond the violence and selfishness that had destroyed so many other civilizations. The fate of not just Earth, but potentially all intelligent life in the galaxy might depend on how well humanity could demonstrate its worthiness to inherit the legacy of the Keepers. As the research team spent more time inside the ship, they began to understand that the entire vessel was designed as an elaborate test. Each new section they explored presented challenges that required not just technical knowledge, but specifically human qualities like cooperation, creativity, and ethical reasoning. The ship's AI was carefully evaluating every decision they made and every solution they proposed. The first major test came when Rick and Sam tried to access the ship's engineering section. The doorway was sealed, and the computer presented them with a complex puzzle. The solution required both Rick's mechanical skills and Sam's knowledge of biological systems. Neither could solve it alone, but working together, they found that the ship's systems were designed to integrate living processes with mechanical functions in ways that human technology had never achieved. When they finally opened the engineering section, they discovered power systems that had been running continuously for 50,000 years without any maintenance. The fusion reactors used principles that human scientists were only beginning to understand, but they were designed to be completely safe and self-regulating. More importantly, the blueprints for building similar systems were locked behind ethical tests that required proof the technology would be used for peaceful purposes. Kate and Ben faced their own challenges when they tried to access the ship's environmental control systems. The computer presented them with scenarios about terraforming planets and managing ecosystems. Their knowledge of Earth's climate and geological processes helped them understand the alien technology, but they also had to demonstrate that they valued environmental protection over short-term economic gain. The ship's AI created holographic simulations that tested their decision-making abilities. In one scenario, they were given control of a planet-wide weather system and had to balance the needs of different regions. In another, they had to decide how to distribute limited resources among competing populations. The tests were designed to reveal whether they prioritized cooperation over competition, long-term thinking over immediate benefits. Lisa discovered that the ship contained a vast museum of artifacts from dozens of civilizations. Each display case was locked with puzzles that tested knowledge of history, art, and culture. The AI seemed particularly interested in how humans valued creativity and beauty, asking complex questions about the purpose of art and the importance of preserving cultural heritage even during difficult times. Paul found that the linguistic sections of the archive contained not just technical information, but literature, poetry, and philosophical writings from across the galaxy. The ship's computer tested his ability to understand different ways of thinking and communicating, but also his appreciation for the diversity of ideas and perspectives that made each civilization unique. Amy faced the most challenging tests when she tried to access the ship's most advanced physics systems. The computer presented her with theoretical problems that pushed the boundaries of human scientific understanding, but it also required her to consider the ethical implications of each discovery. When she learned about weapons technology that could destroy entire planets, she had to prove she would never use such knowledge for destructive purposes. Dan discovered that the ship's computer systems were protected by security measures that tested not just technical skill, but moral character. To access deeper levels of the archive, he had to demonstrate that he valued knowledge for its own sake, not for the power it could provide. The AI presented him with opportunities to gain personal advantage and evaluated his responses carefully. Colonel Hayes found himself in an increasingly difficult position. His superiors in Washington were demanding immediate access to the ship's military applications, but the AI refused to reveal any weapons technology until humanity as a whole had proven its peaceful intentions. The computer created tests specifically, designed to evaluate military leadership, asking questions about the proper use of force and the responsibility of those who command others. The most significant breakthrough came when the team realized that the individual tests were just preparation for a larger challenge. The ship's AI began presenting scenarios that required all of them to work together, combining their different skills and knowledge to solve increasingly complex problems. These group challenges tested not just their individual abilities, but their capacity for cooperation and mutual respect. In one scenario, they were given control of a space colony facing multiple crises simultaneously. Kate had to manage environmental problems while Amy worked on technical solutions. Sam dealt with biological threats while Paul handled communication with different alien species. Rick maintained critical systems while Lisa preserved cultural artifacts. Dan coordinated information flow while Colonel Hayes made strategic decisions. Only by working together could they save the colony. The ship's AI explained that this collaborative approach was exactly what had made humans interesting to the Keepers. Most intelligent species developed either as fierce individualists or as collective minds that sacrificed individual creativity. Humans were unusual in their ability to maintain individual identity while still cooperating effectively with others. The tests became more demanding as the AI evaluated humanity's readiness for the responsibilities that would come with access to Keeper knowledge. They were presented with moral dilemmas about intervention in the development of less advanced species. They had to decide how to handle conflicts between different groups and how to balance competing interests fairly. Amy realized that the ship itself was the ultimate test. Every system they had successfully activated, every puzzle they had solved, every challenge they had overcome had been carefully designed to evaluate human character and capabilities. The AI had been watching not just their successes, but how they handled failures, how they treated each other during stressful situations, and whether they remained committed to their values even when facing difficult choices. Kate understood that they were not just being tested as individuals, but as representatives of the entire human species. Their decisions and actions would determine whether humanity would be granted access to the full archive of Keeper knowledge, including technologies that could transform human civilization and enable travel to the stars. The ship's AI announced that the preliminary tests were complete, but that one final challenge remained. This last test would be the most important of all, requiring them to make a choice that would define humanity's future relationship with the rest of the galaxy. The decision they made would determine not just whether humans gained access to advanced technology, but what kind of species they would become as they took their place among the stars. The ship's central control room transformed as the AI prepared to present the final challenge. The holographic displays merged into a single massive projection that filled the entire chamber. Star maps appeared showing the current locations of surviving civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Most of the inhabited systems were marked in red, indicating species that had developed advanced technology but had become warlike and destructive. Only a few systems glowed green, representing civilizations that had achieved both technological advancement and social wisdom. The AI's voice resonated through the chamber as it explained the choice facing humanity. The complete archive of Keeper. Knowledge was ready to be transferred, including blueprints for faster-than-light spacecraft, unlimited clean energy systems, medical technologies that could eliminate disease and extend human lifespans, and communication arrays that could connect Earth with other peaceful civilizations across the galaxy. However, access to this knowledge came with an enormous responsibility. Humanity would have to agree to become the new keepers, taking over, the role that the original species had played for thousands of years. This meant not just preserving and protecting knowledge, but also helping guide other developing civilizations and preventing the kind of galactic warfare that had nearly destroyed all intelligent life. Kate felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The technologies in the archive could solve every major problem facing Earth. Climate change could be reversed using advanced environmental management systems. Poverty and hunger could be eliminated with unlimited clean energy and improved agriculture. Diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia could be cured with alien medical knowledge. But the AI made it clear that becoming keepers would also mean giving up humanity's isolation. Earth would become part of a galactic community with all the opportunities and dangers that such membership would bring. Humans would have to learn to interact with dozens of different alien species, some of which might be hostile or difficult to understand. Amy studied the star maps carefully, noting the locations of the surviving peaceful civilizations. Most were far older than humanity, having developed spaceflight thousands of years ago. A few were younger, still in the early stages of developing the technologies that would eventually allow them to travel between stars. If humanity accepted the role of keepers, they would be responsible for helping protect and guide these younger species. Colonel Hayes faced the most difficult personal choice. His military training had taught him to think in terms of national security and competitive advantage. The technologies in the archive could make the United States the dominant power on Earth, capable of defending itself against any threat. But the AI had made it clear that the knowledge would only be shared if humanity committed to using it for peaceful cooperation rather than military dominance. Sam realized that becoming keepers would fundamentally change what it meant to be human. No longer would humanity be a single species struggling to survive on one planet. Instead, humans would become part of a galactic civilization, with responsibilities extending far beyond Earth. Future generations would grow up knowing they were part of something much larger than their home world. Paul found himself thinking about the philosophical implications of the choice. The Keeper archives contained not just scientific knowledge, but wisdom gained from thousands of years of observing different civilizations. Accepting this heritage would mean that humanity would have to mature rapidly, developing the ethical and social systems needed to handle such power responsibly. The debate among the team members continued for hours. Rick argued that humanity deserved the chance to solve its own problems and develop its own technologies at its own pace. Lisa worried that accepting alien knowledge might cause humans to lose their unique cultural identity. Dan was concerned about the security implications of opening Earth to contact with other civilizations. But as they discussed the options, a consensus began to emerge. Kate pointed out that the climate crisis on Earth was accelerating beyond humanity's current ability to solve. Sam noted that many diseases affecting millions of people could be cured immediately with Keeper medical knowledge. Amy argued that the scientific advances possible through accessing the archive could benefit not just humans, but potentially every intelligent species in the galaxy. The breakthrough came when Paul suggested a modification to the traditional keeper role. Instead of having a small group of guardians making decisions for entire civilizations, humanity could establish an international council where representatives from every nation on Earth would participate in galactic affairs. This would ensure that no single country or group could monopolize the alien knowledge for their own benefit. The AI considered this proposal carefully, running simulations and consulting records of how other species had handled similar transitions. After several minutes, it announced that the collaborative approach proposed by the humans was actually superior to the methods used by previous keeper civilizations. The idea of distributed responsibility and democratic decision-making was exactly the kind of innovation that the original keepers had hoped humanity might contribute. Kate stepped forward to speak for the team. She explained that humanity accepted the responsibility of becoming the new keepers, but with the understanding that this knowledge would belong to all humans, not just to any single nation or organization. The technologies would be shared openly, with international cooperation ensuring that they were used for the benefit of everyone on Earth and beyond. The ship's AI approved their decision, noting that this commitment to cooperation and shared responsibility was precisely what had made humanity interesting to the original keepers 50,000 years ago. The complete archive began to download, transferring vast amounts of information to human computer systems that had been specially modified to handle the alien data formats. Over the following months, the knowledge gained from the Keeper archive began to transform human civilization. Clean fusion reactors provided unlimited energy, ending dependence on fossil fuels and reversing climate change. Medical breakthroughs eliminated most diseases and began extending human lifespans. Agricultural improvements ended hunger and allowed damaged ecosystems to recover. The first human-built starships were launched within 5 years, carrying not just explorers and scientists, but also artists, teachers, and philosophers. These ships traveled to nearby star systems where young civilizations were developing, offering guidance and assistance while being careful not to interfere with natural cultural development. Kate stood on the observation deck of the starship, explorer as it approached a planet where an intelligent species was just beginning to develop radio communications. In the cargo holds below were teachers and medical supplies, art and music from Earth, and copies of the Keeper archives that would be shared when the alien civilization was ready to receive them. The buried starship found beneath Arctic ice had indeed changed everything, but not in the way anyone had expected. It had not given humanity new weapons or technologies for conquest. Instead, it had revealed that humanity's greatest strength was their capacity to choose cooperation over competition, wisdom over power, and responsibility over privilege. As the explorer entered orbit around the alien world, Kate reflected on how far humanity had come. They were no longer alone in the universe, struggling to survive on a single planet. They had become gardeners of knowledge and guardians of wisdom, helping to nurture the growth of intelligence and compassion throughout the galaxy. The future that stretched ahead was filled with challenges and opportunities beyond anything humans had ever imagined, but they would face it together as both the inheritors and the protectors of the greatest gift any species could receive.